Greatest tool I think we could ever learn is the ability to let go. The only thing that was going to make me quit was if I was afraid to die. You know what? I'm not a bad guy. I am okay. Life is just a series of chaotic events, one after another. And it really is just about perspective and how I guess I look at it and how I handle it and how I move through it.
So tell me, who's Tom Hruby?
I was a Navy SEAL for 9 years. After finishing as a SEAL, I walked on, played D1 football at Northwestern University for Pat Fitzgerald. Prior to that, I fought MMA. I'm a Chicagoland father of 7 boys. I just started up a nature school, alternative school program.
After you did finish the novel, did you find that you were more peaceful or you could let go of some things?
Well, greatest tool I think we could ever learn in the midst of life and chaos is the ability to let go. And the only way to let go of something is we have to have it in our hands, right? So we got to be able to look at it. We got to be able to spin it around, and we got to decide whether we're going to hang on to this thing and I'm going to put it back into my pocket and keep it, or I'm just going to say, you're free to go. Goodbye. Right. And that's the beauty of writing this. And journaling is something that I had started 15 years ago and was off and on. And over the last 10 years, I've journaled pretty religiously. And that's the process of taking a look at something, really understanding it from as many angles as you possibly can, and then deciding whether or not I still need to hang on to this. I got to analyze it a little more, or whatever however it serves you, or allowing this to go and to carry on and move on to the next stage.
What advice would you have to someone that is struggling to let go of?
I'd start with self-inquiry, which can be really helped by writing down and journaling. It's pretty tough to find the words enough that you can speak this to anybody. And now, of course, if you have somebody that's available that you trust enough that you can tell some of these things to, great, right? I don't think many people have that. And if you don't, well, you always got it right here. Fill page after page, sloppy writing, horrible writing, run-on sentences, punctuation, none of that matters. You're writing it to yourself. No one will ever see it besides you. But it's important that it does come out. It's important that it's no longer sitting inside of you, questioning whether or not what you've done is okay. It's important that you look at it and come to terms with it. I'd say that's the greatest thing you can do, is get it out of you, however that takes.
It's kind of ironic how that way of being open is seen as almost fixing yourself. But the only way to properly do it, like you mentioned, is it's almost you have to break yourself a little bit. Because like you mentioned, that process at the beginning is really tough. It is. And you know more than anybody, first few days writing those stories and writing those feelings, it's a horrible, horrible feeling. And from your perspective, do you think that you do kind of have to break yourself a little bit just so you can be more open about those kind of things that are lingering in your mind?
We put all of the sensitive stuff and we hide it away in the most protective place we can. Some point, something is going to breach that little safe space. The question is, are you going to allow it or not? And for how long will you allow that safe space to be blown open? You know, many times over the years, I've had opportunities to be very introspective, right? Something happens in your life and you find yourself in a very painful situation and you got 2 choices, right? You can look at this deeply and learn from it and understand everything you possibly can to a certain point and then utilize those lessons and move on. Or you can close that back up and blame somebody else and then do your best to pretend maybe that never happened or that it wasn't your fault. To break that open and to stay in that is, I mean, it's really one of the most difficult things that you could ever do. I think that that's probably one of the bravest, most courageous moves that anybody will ever make, particularly young men that have grown up in a space where processing your feelings, talking about how you look at the world, a safe place where you can have genuinely unique thoughts and someone will listen to your opinions and allow discussion based upon your particularly unique points of view. That's rare. That's rare. So not very many of us grow up experiencing that. So as you grow and you get to a certain space where you think you're operating fairly reasonably and normal, and then something begins to crack. And now you realize that a lot of what you thought about, what you believed We're not your thoughts. We're not your own. We're not your own perspectives. We're not your own ideas. It's a scary, terribly scary space to be in. Now, how do you find people that you can now kind of reevaluate the way you look at the world? That also is hard to find. And there's not that many people out there that will sit in a space with you long enough to allow you to reassess your entire world. So again, there's the great place where you can do all of that. And it's right here, pen to paper, and you can analyze everything as deeply and for as long as you would like. You can reread it 100 times if you'd like. You can rewrite it 100 times if you'd like. And I promise you that eventually, whatever it was that was keeping you and holding you to those old ideas, it will be released.
That analogy you had of, there is a point where you have to face those moments, and you can either put them in your pocket, keep them, or you can let them go. And that's a tough period for anybody. It's almost like you have to forgive yourself in a way, and it's hard. It's not easy at all. And for someone like you that's lived through so much chaos and so many different stages, that is only harder again. But do you remember the moment where that forgiveness became a little bit easier to see? It almost didn't feel impossible anymore.
October of 2017, I walked into my first AA meeting. And that was the first moment that I thought, holy smokes, these people will listen to me. All right. I could tell some of these stories. And so from that point on, I was hooked. And I probably attended 1,000 AA meetings. But it was maybe about 6 months, March of 2018. That is when the so-called miracle happened. Right. And at that moment, up until that point, I was doing what we call white knuckling my way through sobriety. And I mean, it was a real white knuckling ride. But I had a moment somewhere, 6 months or so in sobriety, where I had left a meeting and I was working on and practicing a lot of other modalities for healing, breath work, some shamanic work, meditations, really, you name it. And I was looking for it, trying to find relief, all right, from this sensation of, well, really, the relief that I was no longer getting by running away from some of the painful things that I was hanging on to. So 6 months in, I come out of an AA meeting somewhere along the way, and I remember walking out, and we have this little farm, and I walk out there, and I remember feeling all of it, or at least at the time as much as I could feel, but it was very contrasting and significant feeling of a release. All the pain and the anxiety, and I felt free for the first time in my life. And it was that moment that I thought, you know what? I'm not a bad guy. I am okay. And that was the feeling of forgiveness, right? That was the moment of forgiveness. And that's really, in my opinion, what the 12-step programs is teaching us. It takes you all the way through this entire 12 steps. You have to forgive other people. We have to ask for forgiveness. And eventually you'll have this spiritual experience at the end. So they say, step 13 is you now know how to forgive yourself. It's all designed around forgiving yourself for everything that you have piled on. And that was where I learned it, was 2018, post AA and a whole bunch of other modalities, that the real relief, the real freedom comes from the moment that you can look at yourself and forgive yourself for the things, because we're our own worst critics. We are our biggest judgers. We'll hold ourselves down through our thoughts. And until you can allow yourself to be okay with, fucking some things up sometimes and still be able to move forward and move past it and still continue on mission sometimes, then you're going to feel that heaviness. You'll feel guilty and shame.
Did you find out in that process that there's a difference between healing from those past things and just trying to forget about them?
Sure.
How did that feel when that realization came to you?
Well, I think the greatest realization in regards to and around healing is the understanding of the concept that we're already healed. We never really were broken. We never really were any of these things. We just had convinced ourselves that there was something wrong with us. And when we do something that supposedly we weren't supposed to, we think something we supposedly weren't supposed to, and sometimes it results in somebody else being hurt, which we don't want that to be the case, but it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you are a broken person. It doesn't mean that you are an unhealed human. You have just chosen to be unhealed, or chosen to be broken, or chosen to consider yourself someone that has something wrong with them. So you see the kind of difference once we just slightly tweak the understanding of a concept like healing versus non-healing. Whereas I could spend all of my time attempting to heal myself for whatever we may think that we have that's wrong, right? We could say that we have some sort of a deficiency, an emotional deficiency or something like that. And so now I want to spend my time trying to heal myself of that problem or a trauma that had occurred. Well, come on. We all know we're going to experience traumas all day, every day for the rest of our lives. And we did for our entire existence up until today. And it's not going away. So how do we handle that? Are we always in a constant state of healing from traumas that we're going to receive all day today? We can. And I think many people do. And that's great because I think that understanding the need to process and heal is a great step, an evolutionary step that we're making. Now, next, understand that, there's nothing wrong with you to begin with. And just because you had made mistakes, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you now.
There's a great quote in this by Ram Dass. The first time I ever heard it, it's almost like I knew exactly what it was at. And Ram says that we're all just walking each other home. And I think it's so good because whenever you're talking about those moments where you realize that you were only really around the corner from healing, but you just didn't want to go around the corner. Whenever you think back on it now, whenever you get to the conclusion like you did, it's just like you were trying to guide yourself there, but you were almost just like, I want to stay out here. I won't want to go home yet. But yeah, I think it's a perfect analogy for what you just described.
It really is. And Ram Dass says it a lot better, far more concise than I just did. Well, once you're healed, right? So the challenge is once you realize that you're a healed being, there's nothing left to fix. And that puts us in quite the predicament as human beings,
It's scary.
doesn't it? Right?
It's scary.
There is nothing left to fix. So now what do I do with myself? Right? That becomes a serious dilemma that all of us find ourselves in. What do I do with the rest of my life? What do I do? What is the meaning of my past and all of the things that I had done? Are they meaningless? Were they all mechanisms for defense against having to look at myself or an attempt at healing something that is already healed, right? So it brings up some pretty interesting concepts.
With your life now at a calmer perspective, do you miss the chaos?
No, I don't miss it because there's still chaos, right?
Different kind.
The chaos is a bit different, but it's still there. Life is just a series of chaotic events, one after another. You're just not going to ever escape them. And so I found that whether I'm in training grounds, the battlefields, a football field, in the gym, on a mat, in a match of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it doesn't make a difference. There's chaos. Whether I'm talking to the HOA now, which it's so different in a way, but it's still all the same. And dealing with people in business, in government, in the HOAs, interpersonal relationships, fostering kids, dealing with government agencies, it's all endless chaos. And it really is just about perspective and how I guess I look at it and how I handle it and how I move through it.
Like you said, different levels of chaos, different types at different stages. And I mean, going back through that and putting it onto a bit of paper, how did it feel writing about your life?
We had done tons of interviews, hours and hours of interviews, and we discussed the entire format. We had looked at the biography, and I had the opportunity. James is fantastic. I mean, this guy is a real professional and a genius of a writer and an author. And he sat down and we chronicled almost my entire life. And it was one of the great experiences. So difficult, so painful, so challenging, so exciting, so exhilarating, all of it, as I chronicled from childhood and my life with my family, my father, my parents, my brother who overdosed on heroin and had died in his 20s, an alcoholic father, a workaholic mother, growing up in Indiana, transitioning from schools to schools and moving all over the place. So I got to re-experience and almost write that entire perspective for myself. So to tell my story is one thing, right? To analyze the crap out of it in order to figure out how I could turn this into a story, into a book, into a biography, right? Because I can't, no one's going to read an 800-page biography or an 800-page novel. You gotta go through everything and decide what needs to be in here in order to tell this story exactly the way that we want the story to be told. Declan Novak makes a lot of mistakes. It's not a perfect story. He doesn't do everything right. And some people do get hurt and decisions are made that aren't seemingly beneficial at the moment. And Declan has to come to terms with that. He has to forgive himself, and he has to look at himself in these scenarios and decide that I did the best I could at the time. And that's just how it turned out. But it doesn't mean that I can't move forward. And he does. And that's really the story: redemption, and then the ability to continue to move forward for a great cause, helping kids, right?
I'm going to pivot away from the healing aspect for a little while because I feel like you've dropped some gems there that I think are going to relate a lot better now to whenever we go on to a little bit about what your time as a Navy SEAL learned you. And the first thing specifically that I want to talk about, because the first thing anybody thinks of when they think of Navy SEAL is discipline.
It does take an enormous amount of discipline. Good Lord, did it take a whole lot. Of course, I still am a proponent of, once you have decided, the hardest, really the most important piece of discipline is deciding what it is that you actually want, which is in itself is quite a difficult challenge. But once you know who you are and what it is that you want, the path really will lay itself out for you. And it did for me. Of course, I had to stay on the path. I had to be persistent, and I had to do what you'd consider discipline. But it was very clear. This is where I wanted to go. This is who I wanted to be. This is what I needed to know. And the path was laid out right in front of me. So discipline was a matter of just following that path day after day after day. That was very well laid out, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I know it's more challenging now. I wish I could still have that. I wish I could have that today with the rest of my life. I knew exactly what it was that I was going to do with the rest of my life. Every day, you'll know what it is you need to do. You'll know exactly what I need, what my daily schedule needs to look like. If I'm genuinely honest, I will lay in bed at the end of the day and I will self-assess my day. I'll say, I didn't train this enough. I didn't work on this enough. I'm a little slow here. Maybe I can't afford to pay my bills, so that way I can hit the YMCA again in the evening and do some more swim training, right? So all of those things get really clearly laid out for you if you, in fact, know what you want, and if, in fact, you're willing to do whatever it takes to get there. So all of that was done for me. Now it was just a matter of, will I follow this path regardless of the additional obstacles that come up, right? Your car breaks down. Your girlfriend breaks up with you. These are things that had occurred for me at that time. The Navy recruiter, won't return your phone calls. At that time, those things seem enormous, sometimes even insurmountable, right? Enough that it will throw you off your path. But again, the path is just wondering, just how willing is this guy to do whatever it takes to get there? Does he really want that? And if he does, everything you need to know will be there for you. I learned in BUDS right away, right? So BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition School, and it's considered the hardest military training in the world. 85% or more don't make it. It's 6 months long. There's a few months in the beginning before you go to BUDS, which is excruciating as well. And then there's still another, I think it's like 9 or 10 months after BUDS, which is very difficult as well. But in BUDS, the 6 months of BUDS, give or take, the fourth week is what's called Hell Week, and it's 5 days where you don't sleep. They keep you moving. Well, you get 1 2-hour nap, I think, on Wednesday, and that actually was the worst part of BUDS, in my opinion, was waking up from a 2-hour nap on Wednesday when you've been up for like 78 hours or something like that. But BUDS really it taught me that the only thing that was going to make me quit was if I was afraid to die. I know this sounds crazy, right? Right. But that's what it opens the door up to, all of these fears that you're really, and when I say die, I don't necessarily mean that, you're going to cease to live and you'll stop breathing. You're gonna die in ways where you will no longer be able to lead a life that you think you wanted to lead. I had a guy, a great buddy of mine. He finishes Hell Week and he comes and says, "Dude, my legs hurt really bad. I'm going to go get checked out." I mean, it turns out he's got fractures in both of his legs. He has 4 fractures, 2 in each leg. And he went through Hell Week, right? So we're 5.5 days of nonstop training, goes through the weekend, spends the whole next week, and then goes, "Hey, I'm not feeling too good." Right? So that guy, at some point, without a doubt, he was thinking to himself, what if I have serious problems with my legs and I will never walk again? Right? We're all going to go through that at some point. And will your mind be strong enough? Do you have enough fortitude to say, "I don't care. if I never walk right again, I am continuing on this journey. And he had made that choice, right? So the guys that make it, they all somewhere along the road have to make that choice, whether their shoulder, their neck, something happens to them, or, they're breaching hypothermia. And another guy, he was about 130 pounds, the skinniest little kid. And he was 17 years old, so he looked like a little baby. He looked like he was 14 when he was soaking wet and we were sitting in the surf zone. But we're being surf tortured where they have us interlock our arms and we sit in the Pacific. And the Pacific's very cold. And it's also the middle of the night. And so we're all jackhammering freezing cold, and I'm feeling sorry for myself. The instructors come by and they're checking us to make sure that nobody's dangerously hypothermic. And they pass by me and this guy, his name's Ben, he's right next to me. And he's the skinniest little kid you'd ever see. And he's shaking so violently. His shivering is violent shaking where his whole body is convulsing. And he has snot coming out of his nose, and he's got covered in seawater and sand and sores all over him, just like all of us. But this kid looked like I thought we were in a medical emergency. And the instructors come over and they check him. And they say, hey, let's take him back to the ambulance. And they put him in the ambulance and they take his temperature and they say to him, yeah, you're fine. You got two options, man. What do you want? You can stay here and you can ring the bell, and that's how you get out of buds. You quit by ringing the bell 3 times, or you can go back out there with your buddies and get back in the surf. And Ben said, I'm going back out there. And he's convulsed his way back in and he locked back arms with me. And I remember looking at the kid and I'm thinking, I think he might die. And I'm really concerned for him. And he just looks at me with his big white eyes and he goes, I'm back, man. I'm back. And I thought, if that guy's going to make it, there's no possible way that I will not make it. If he's still here, I will stay here. And those are the kind of things you learn. You look at other people and you realize the power that they have, and you watch them move through life with that kind of power. He did not have the skills he didn't have the mass that I had. That's it. It's the only thing that probably caused hundreds, thousands of other kids to quit buds was the simple fact that they didn't have the same body mass. So they experienced cold in a so much more painfully dramatic way than I did. Right. And they would quit, but not this one. Not this young man. He said, hell no, I'm sticking this one out. So now, can I take that perspective now throughout my whole life? And I can see people operating in this way all the time, right? So no matter what I choose, no matter how hard it gets, whether divorce is difficult, whether raising 4, 5, 6, 7 kids is difficult, whether dealing in a relationship with my girlfriend, right? I mean, these are all challenging things. And you can look around and see that, no, this is being done. People are doing this. This is possible. How do they do it? What are they doing that's different, right? A lot of times I'm just not going to run away. I'm going to stay in this and I'm going to endure whatever it is. I mean, that can be a little dangerous too in its own way, but at some point, right, you've got to be able to make the choice. I'm here and I'm staying and I'm going to do this. And if it causes me to no longer walk again one day the right way,
A little bit.
some of those guys were willing to take that risk. And so was I. Right. I was willing, essentially, I convinced myself that I was willing to die in order to make it through buds and to become a Navy SEAL. I genuinely think that same idea carries over today. Now, being a father and an older, and my body's just not the way it once was. Am I going to put myself through those physical, excruciating things ever again? I really hope I don't ever have to do that again. But I am willing, right, to give up my personal existence or my idea of life for other people now or for other things. So it's the same concept, just, tweaked a little bit different, right? I'm not going to let anybody put a boat on my head anymore. I just don't want to go through my neck. It won't feel good for about 6 weeks. So I'm not going to do that. Right. But I am willing to really look at it and say, you know what? I'm here for you, son. I'm here for you, my friends, my girlfriend, my parents. And if it means that I lose everything, then I will lose everything. If my life no longer looks the way that I want it to be, well, I'm here. It always turns out great, though.
Ironic whenever you hear you talk about that, because if you listen to the first part where we're talking about healing yourself, it's almost like a little Venn diagram. One side's very much an emotional battle and a challenge. The other side's a lot more physical, but they kind of meet in the middle with it's a mental battle overall. And there's Michael Jordan has a great story of he's got this injury sometime in like his rookie year and something's wrong with his foot, and the doctor says like, you've got such a particular injury, like it would be stupid for you to keep playing basketball on it because it could just get so much worse, your career could be over. And he says to the doctor, what would happen if I played? And he said, well, there's probably an 20% chance that you would probably not be able to play basketball again. And the owner of the team looks at him and goes, you're insane to play. And he says, well, what would happen if the over 80% came out instead of the 20? And he said, well, it might heal itself, it might be fine. And the owner looks at him and goes, you really going to take that chance? The owner turns around and goes, let me put it in a different perspective. If you had a headache and I give you tablets, 10 tablets in the jar, 2 of them would kill you. Would you put your hand in and take a tablet? And he turned and looked at him and goes, depends how bad the headache is and how much I want rid of it. And he went out and played and he did not care. And I think it's just, there's that mental switch up. But let me ask you a different question, because I was piecing this together. I was trying to think of ways that I could contrast 2 different lives with you. And one of the things that I was drawing contrast between was Maslow's got a theory on peak experiences. And I was relating it to the life of a drug addict, because he talks about how when people have experiences of heightened adrenaline, like you talked about Hell Week, you're up high, 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 high. Then when you leave, you have to come back down again. It's kind of like a drug addict when their high wears off. And what a lot of people do when they get back down to baseline is, where's my next hit coming from? Where am I coming from? And that creates the addiction. But for you, after you left the SEALs, you returned to normal life. What was that like for you?
That's a great question. Yeah, our bodies have to re-regulate for sure. I'm sure this has been studied and it's pretty well documented. I imagine that chemically our bodies have become dependent upon certain experiences that create this chemical reaction. We're some kind of a dopamine fixation. We also have what's called fatigue too. Our bodies become fatigued from it to a point where maybe you just can't produce those same levels of dopamine and experience that you once did, which therefore forces you to no longer, or you chase it to a certain point. And that's what we would call it, chasing the dragon. And I remember thinking that sort of in 2013 as I was working on my transition out of the Navy and then at the same time walking on at Northwestern. So I knew that my path was leading me back home to Northwest Indiana to be out of the service and figure out a life. So once I had made that decision, really the pathway kind of opened itself up for me. Looking back on it, right? Kind of seeing it from 2020 hindsight vision, I see that this opportunity to play football, which is a very similar experience, right? Lots of ups and downs, lots of really exciting adrenaline, thrill-seeking opportunities. Every Saturday you're playing a game, right? And so you know, I was experiencing a lot of that same stuff, but that was the path kind of really setting me up from how do you get that same experience, but no longer do I need to go on deployment. No longer am I away from my family. No longer do I have to go on these long training trips. Now I can do that, you know, relatively local. So for me, it was absolutely important and such a vital thing that Coach Fitzgerald and the staff at Northwestern and the football team and all of those guys took me in, or happy to take me in, and allowed me to be a part of that team and that program. That was a huge transition. I think that, can it be done in other ways? I think so, but I know it's just so challenging for high-level athletes, military personnel that have lived that life for some amount of time. And really, to be honest, it's not as if that was created in us with the military experience. You know, that was kind of something that was there before, right? We sought out that lifestyle because that's what suited us. And so we ended up right where we were supposed to be. No big deal, right? But now how do you kind of work yourself back into regular life? Patience, right? And that's another great, I think, tool that I learned through the service was you got to learn how to be super patient. It does just take time, right? Rather call it healing, call it understanding of your healedness already. It takes some time to get to that space. And it doesn't just all of a sudden eliminate the need for thrill, for adrenaline, for excitement, to accomplish things, to experience competition. Like that's all still there. I still enjoy doing those things, but I can always reframe myself and I can always move myself back to another space. And I have dozens of tools where if I really feel like I need something in particular, but it may not be the best choice for me at the moment, right? I have ways of moving myself past that, letting go of that need and finding something else that can fill whatever that little gap is in my day or my life. And I think that that's what we're looking and trying to do with veterans. It's very important that we allow veterans the patience, give them the patience, and we allow them the time to work through that whole process. And so many people are that way. I say elite athletes because I know them and I know Special Forces veterans. I know them and I know how that experience, how they're affected by that experience. But that's what's from the perspective of fellow community members and family members and maybe the mental health community, et cetera, right? These people that are here back home, bringing these veterans and these athletes back into the fold. This is what they need. This is the time that it takes. And it's not an easy process, but it is a very, very doable one. And at the same time, you're still getting somebody with a wonderful series of skills that you just maybe can't acquire besides doing the things that we have done. And now they become part of your community rather than become sort of a challenging outsider of the community.
I want to touch on some things a little bit about fatherhood quickly before we go. And one of them specifically, I want to bridge the link here between, because you obviously mentioned your sons and how you kind of approach it a little bit differently based on things that you've done and stuff. And we mentioned at the start about your healing process and how that goes. And something that brought up in my mind was a thing that I read about transgenerational trauma passed down, which is, it's not the same as like your kid get your traits or your addictive habits, things like that. It's whatever you're feeling or you never fully dealt with, they get parts of it. So I want to ask you this because you've got 4 boys, so you've seen it at all different levels now and all different types of people pretty much, because no one of them's the same as the next one. So have you noticed that healing yourself has kind of helped your kids in those healing periods?
I think that's another great question. And when I look at what can we do in this world that's really meaningful and going to make a huge difference in the future of mankind, like I did my part. I had 20 prime years where, I was going to really make a huge impact. And I was so convinced, ambitious in my impact. And I'm sure I did. And, maybe not all good. I don't know. We'll see. One day when we get to do a full life review, I'll be able to look back and see how effective all that was. But regardless, the most important, I think, thing for society is we got to raise the next generation of human beings. I mean, when I look at my kids, when I look at any kids, so I coach a few football teams, I coach wrestling, we have a school. When I look at these kids, I see them, every one of them, they are literally the peak. They are the tip of the spear of human evolution. And that's how I view every single child. This person, I don't know, thousands of years of evolution to get to this point right here. I mean, how special is that? It's pretty damn amazing. And if we get to influence, guide, coach, teach, pass on generational stuff, because remember, the things that we pass on generationally are not all trauma. Right? There are so many beautiful virtues that we also are passing on. So it's important that we recognize that, yes, it's good to observe and realize that some traumatic experiences have caused us to behave in certain ways, right? And, to take different mechanisms into play. But it's also very important to realize that there are so many wonderful traits and virtues that we're also passing on. And we should look at those and we should cherish them, right? We should be extremely grateful that those exist as well. Why not look at the ones that are a little bit more challenging? But I think even those are there to teach us as well, right? They have the equal value to humanity as we work through these things. So, you think of like a cycle breaker, kind of a person in a family line, right? So lots of alcoholism in mine. At some point, somebody was going to be that person that decides to break that cycle. It happened to be me, but it could have been somebody else, and it probably would have been my kids. And I can only hope that I did that for my kids, that they don't have to experience that. Maybe they don't have to go through that same phase of existence. But they may, and that's okay too. So it's really, that has allowed me to be totally okay with whatever my kids or whatever these young kids, whatever the tips of the spear of humankind have to go through. That's okay. They are doing exactly what they have to. They're in exactly the right spot, and they're going to experience the things that they need to experience. Most of them are going to become the cycle breakers of their family. This is the generation of cycle breakers. The amount of information, the vastness of our abilities to process and see everything, it's never been like this before. Our kids are going to have awareness of all of these little tiny nuanced things that I frankly had no idea even existed until 10 or 12 or 15 years ago. My kids have already experienced it all. They're already run across all of these things. So now all it takes is just some gentle guidance, right? And keep them in a space where they're willing and able to look at this stuff. They're willing and able to talk about it. Doesn't mean that I've got the answers, because I don't, but they will. Again, they'll solve many of their own problems in their own time. So that's how I look at fatherhood, right? That's how I look at us as grown-ups and guides for children in their lives. We got to recognize and see the vast amount of power, the vast abilities, the differences that they're going to make in the world, the absolute goodness inside of them. And if we do that, just like I talked about, once you know for sure what it is you want to do with your life, the path will reveal itself. Now, all you got to do is stay on it. Same thing. When you look at a kid and you see the pure good in that kid, the absolute potential in that child, all right, everything is going to fall in place. How do I guide a kid along that path? It's pretty easy. It will be easily revealed to you. Maybe I'm wrong.
Let's hope not. Got one last question for you, because we've heard so many stories now of you breaking mental barriers, and your outlook on everything is very strong and it's heavy. And I've been looking at that photo of a lion in the background for the whole interview. How has fatherhood changed your opinion on strength?
Oh, yeah, that's good. So there was a certain point we talked about breaking that shell open, or that safe spot open, and having to deal with that. There was a time where I had to, for my own personal sake, I had to take down the Navy SEAL stuff, right? Take down the pictures of me in a ring, all of that stuff that I had built a real structure of, a sound sort of image, and get rid of all of that, right? I've since now embraced it all, but I had to go through that process, and that was a very tough and painful thing to do. But it was also tough and painful to even bring it back in a healthy way, right? Well, what I would think is a more healthy way of understanding all of these things that I had gone through and done, and what represents true masculinity, what represents, really being a man, what really is strength and power, what really is what kids need. Right? Do they need that? Is that what's important for their upbringing? So that perspective and the questions that I ask revolving around what do kids actually need? I think my favorite to the date story is my oldest son played football and wrestled, and he's since quit football. And I just struggled so hard with the idea that he wasn't going to play football, right? I knew at the deepest levels that it doesn't matter, right? That it's okay that he doesn't, but I still couldn't wrap my head around the fact that he wasn't going to do it. And I wanted so badly to twist the story around where it's like, it'll be really good for your wrestling if you play football. You really should just do it. Look at all those guys out there playing. It's good for your social life. It's good for, right? I could think of 100 ways in which I would want to convince him that he should be playing football. And so then, of course, my mind then goes to, God, he's going to end up hanging out with the wrong people, and he's going to become lazy. And then I'm watching him, look how much time he spends on his phone, right? I could feel myself going in that direction. And so I had to make a change in the way that I perceive my son and the things that he wants to do and how he is choosing to do it. I had to change that perspective, and it took some time. And upon doing so, I began to observe how actually he's getting up and training on his own. And he's finding this sort of intense, ambitious passion to be a wrestler. And now he's showing up and scheduling his own workouts. And now he's going to the YMCA. And now his physique and his strength and his confidence and all of these things were growing, 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 growing. And in the end, I realized he has done all the things that I thought I wanted to see in him all by himself without me making it be a certain particular way. It just happened in his own time, in his own way. And he's right there where he's having a great time and he's doing what he wants to do. So it was just a great experience for me to reframe the way that I think and how I believe things should be. And I think that I can do my best to pass that down to all of his brothers too. I mean, maybe even to myself.
Incredible. Before we go, tell people where they can get Breacher's Playbook.
The Breacher's Playbook is on Amazon. We have an audiobook on Amazon. You can also go to our publisher site, tactical16publishing.com. I have a website, tomrubyseal.com. james.com. James, my co-author, has his website. It is jamespomerantzauthor at .com. There's no at. It's just .com. So those are all the places you can get the book.
Perfect.